And it's kind of funny because I think literally the last time you and I did a show together, I think the last 15 minutes of that episode was basically like lovingly rebuking men for not being willing to move if they don't have a solid church, and just saying, it's costly. Yeah, it's going to hurt. And yeah, there's going to be sacrifice. And yeah, it's going to be hard and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, you're going to have to figure out work and you have to figure this out and figure that out. But what's the alternative? That you stay in your blue progressive, kid transing state, or city, and your wife, you make her, like, you're already paying a cost, right? Your wife, the guy who's listening to this, if this is you, I'm talking to you, right? Your wife is already having to work out of the home because you can't afford the cost of living where you currently live. Like, that is a cost, or you don't have a solid church, or you have a church and it's this technically reformed Baptist church, but they're pietist, right? And they have not seen the profundity of Christian nation gooder than transing kids, which is a profound statement, but they can't see it, right? They are so steeped in pietism, they don't have a clue, right? That like your pastor just shared with you this afternoon the article that John Piper, just put out about how nations, should be Christian, but not too Christian, and that is a cost. You may not even realize it, but the question is, it's like you can always see when you're debating making a change. Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to see the cost that's going to have to be paid if I make this change. It's easier to see the cost you will pay if you do a new thing than the cost that you're currently already paying by staying the same, by doing the old thing. We're aware that if I sign up for this subscription, it's going to cost me $10 a month. What you're probably not aware of is that you're already signed up for 17 different subscriptions. 13 of them you forgot about, and you're actually paying. Like my wife and I, this is a funny example, but like we discovered a couple of years ago that we had 4 Amazon accounts. And I'm like, oh my God, I am single-handedly funding the Antichrist, and like, so, but like 4, because you start one and somehow I forgot about it, and I don't even know how it's possible. I literally still to this day, I don't know how it was happening, but Amazon didn't tell us. They weren't going to help us out, and so they were just taking, our 4 different, pay, and we, you set up your auto pay and blah, blah, blah. And so that's a silly example, but my point is, like, life costs something. It's going to cost something wherever you are. And a lot of times we can see the cost up front for the new thing if we make a change, but we don't see the current cost that we're paying by remaining the same. And so like right now it's like, well, we don't have to move, or, we're already in a house, or we've got this, or our kids are in a school. Okay. That's great. But what's your church really like? What's that school really like? How many hours is your wife having to work out of the home? How, like all those questions being considered. And then it's like, okay, if we moved, maybe we lose this, and this, but what would we gain? Right? We go to Ogden, Utah, and we've got like a baller school, baller church. We've got this, we've got that. If we go to Georgetown, like our church, we're starting, St. George Classical. We're going to fall 2024 next year. We're doing an interest meeting this Saturday with the members in our church, and we've filed the bylaws and all that. Like, so there's something there. You go to Moscow, and it's like, all right, you got a school, you've got a college, you've also got, you've got everything. And so it's like, like there's a cost to making a change, but there's also a cost to staying the same. And a lot of times that cost is actually higher and we don't feel it.
Yeah, big time. I remember Pastor Dan telling me that. I was deliberating on the decision, and I said, I don't know, moving is a risk. And he was like, staying is a risk. Everything's a risk. I mean, there's risk all around you. I think the question is, which ones? Which ones do you want to choose? So we kind of have this internal office joke where Dan will always say, it's usually to me, but Dan will be like, I don't want to offend you accidentally. I want to do it on purpose. and so it's kind of our friend joke, but it's true. It's like, I want to pick the risk, right? I want to pick the situations where I get to decide which risks. And I think there's a lot of it too for people where you're saying, you've heard the saying, like, better is the devil you know than the devil you don't. Every situation is going to have trials. And so people, but I know what they are here. I will also say this just as a point of encouragement for like why tribe is so powerful. I guess this is the case for a powerful tribe. I didn't realize, in fact, like how bad my past situations were until I left them.
Mhm.
And then we came to Ogden and it was like, oh, the world is painted in color, not black and white.
Right.
Oh, like things we hadn't experienced in a long time, like robust friendship, just hospitality within the church on a very ongoing basis, healthy families, healthy marriages. And so once you got to be around those for about a year, it was like, I could easily say after the first year here, and far before that too, but especially after the first year, I would tell people, looking back, I would have given anything to come here. I would have given up my job. I would have given up, doesn't matter. Because people are always like, yeah, but I got a business, I got this thing. And I'm like, if you don't have a robust church and a robust community, here's the deal. You get one life, it's pretty brief. Pretty brief. Like people aren't going to remember you anyway. But what legacy do you want to leave? One of the things that horrifies me the most, you hear these stories of like single people who get to like 40 and they're like, we can't have kids now. And it cuts me, Joel, because I think your legacy is dead forever.
Right.
Forever. And I don't want that. And if I am going to leave a mark in a community, if I'm going to leave a mark in my people, I have to join a tribe. I have to join a tribe of other great men doing great things. And so I was kind of looking at it. I'm like, okay, I'm 35 years old at the time. And, okay.
How long ago was it? How many years has it been since you moved?
Since we started thinking about the decision, it's been a couple. We've been here a little over a year and a half.
Okay.
So yeah, just looking at it, you're like, okay, maybe if I make it to 70, I got 35 more years, 40 years, who knows? But that's not that long. The first 35 went really fast. Right. And so you're saying to yourself, like, how can I actually do something that's going to be worthwhile? And I think connecting men to that too. Here's the other thing I'd say about building a tribe. Dan has said this repeatedly in just like private conversations, but he's like, what I never anticipated is with the King's Hall and with the Hardmen podcast, all the stuff we do. He's like, I think our biggest success is we've been winning the hearts of men. We didn't even know that that's what we were doing, right? We're winning them locally. But when people come here, like we had men at the conference who were like, you have my heart. I want you to know that. And we were like, wow, that really? Like I just met you. But they know you so well through the shows and through the things that you're teaching because nobody else is giving them that. And so that's kind of the other thing that I always tie together in this conversation. You want to build a great tribe. Great tribes, we talk about high competence leaders. Fundamentally, there's really two things. You have to be extremely courageous, right? Wise, all that, but you have to be extremely courageous in the way that you communicate. And number two, you have to speak to the taboo, right? You have to speak to the taboo. The things that we talk about are the things that no one will touch. One of my favorite on the courage front, Stonewall Jackson, right? He's tactically aggressive when everybody else is retreating. I think we have to do that on issues like sexuality, right? To exactly what you're saying. I started the Hardman podcast because I was like, why is everybody blowing the sound for retreat? Like, we can win this. It's battleground that we should be proud to claim. So that's part of it, is saying, okay, we need to attack when others retreat. But the other one is often forgotten. One of the great tacticians of the Civil War was Robert E. Lee. And most people forget that he was in the Army Corps of Engineers. And his main job was, as an engineer, he was the one who picked the battlefield. So he knew where the best positions were. So I think one of the things we have to do, if we're going to be effective as tribes, think about David. I mean, this is masterclass in guerrilla warfare. Hit and run, wear the enemy out. You have to be the flea that wears the dog out. That's how you beat a greater enemy with more resources. This is how the Taliban destroyed the presence of the U.S. in Afghanistan. I like to make the comparison. I said, it's interesting. Global Homo lost. I think the Gospel Coalition and Tim Keller, their way of life is losing. And yet the Taliban won. And it would be wise to sit back and say, why was that? And a big part of it was because, zealous, passionate, yes, all those things. But they knew their battleground, right? And for them, it was physical as well as other things, but they played to their people who, they understood better than we did, all those sorts of things. So it's like, you think about what we did, many of us, on social media. Across several years, we were just the flea under Joe Carter's skin. We were the flea for Ray Ortland. We were the flea for Beth Moore and Russell Moore. Where are those people now? They're not in our camp. Most of them, many of them are not even on social media. If they are, they're like completely outed as leftists, feminists, you know, Beth Moore preaching, right? The thing that they swore up and down she would never do. Same with Amy Bird. What are they doing now? Okay, so it's like, this is how you win. When I was a kid, my mom would always tell me, she said, Eric, you have a rare gift for getting under people's skin. And, you know, she told me, though, she said, as a wise mother, she said, you have to learn how to use that for good, though. Like, make sure you use it for good. But this is fundamentally guerrilla warfare. This is what David was so good at. And I think is what we have to get good at as well. We don't have the most resources, you know. The ability, though, of media and podcasts, as we say all the time, we're constantly out punching our weight class. People will be like, so how big is your church? Like 10,000? And we're like, yeah. I mean, Sun Tzu said that you should, one of the arts of warfare was to make your enemy think you were bigger and different and in a different place. And when you're not well armed, make them think that you're well armed. You know, you want to confuse them, right? Deception is warfare, right? So a lot of it we're not even trying to do, but you look at that and you're like, okay, this is the kind of tactical perspective that we have to have about this fight.
I agree. Yep. So picking your fights, punching above your weight class, I think that's really good. And picking your team and not doing it alone and not spreading yourself too thin. I think that was one of the major failings of the churches planting churches kind of thing that Acts 29 was big on, Gospel Coalition was big on, a lot of guys were big on, and I was big on it. I was in Acts 29. I drank the Kool-Aid. I was like, hey, we're going to, you know, and so all of a sudden what you're doing is you're raising up way more leaders than you actually have. You're saying we've got 10 leaders when you really have like 3, and the other 7 are wearing a title that is not helpful. It actually does more harm than good because they're wearing a title and a uniform that they're not that doesn't fit. They're not actually qualified for it, and then you're sending, you know, if you actually do send out a church plant, you're sending out suicide missions, right? You're sending out a guy who has been, you know, you've humored him as though like this guy, you're a pastor, you're a shepherd, you know, and all solid exegesis, brother. That was a great sermon, you know, when he preaches once a year, you know, and then you send him out with 10 people to plant a church, and 2 years later he's got 10 people planting a church, and you know, you're sending him out to die. It's not loving. It's not. And so saying, no. And, you know, right now, the enemy's at the gates. There are different times. There are different times in the war. Right now, I think we're living in a moment. Sons of Issachar, they know the times. I think the time right now is fall back. And that's not a feckless retreat. You know, but it's, I fell back from California. I'm saying, you know what? We'll take California in 50 years. But right now, I'm going to make sure we keep Texas. And so fall back temporarily. This works politically, it works theologically, you know, but fall back even at the church level and get some alliances, join some forces, and build something formidable, like a force to be reckoned with, like what you guys are doing in Ogden. There's a reason why people, you know, you're punching above your weight. People think, oh, the church must be, you know, 1,500 people or so, whatever. And it's like, well, you know, because it's like, well, surely it is to have 3 leaders of this caliber, because that's part of why people think that. It's the amount of production, how much you produce, how much you put out in your public facing ministry. But then it's also the number of leaders. People look at you, they look at Brian, they look at Dan, now Ben, you know, in Haunted Cosmos, and they think if they've got 4 guys of that theological caliber and that grit and that gravitas, and they're thinking that, you know, the church planting world, they're thinking 4 guys like that, it must be a church of 1,500, because sadly, and this is the thing I'm saying, building all this up to say it's kind of sad. Sadly, that's what it would have been. If you had 4 guys back in the Driscoll days, you know, in Acts 20,
we would have planted 5 churches.
That's right. You would have planted 5 churches by now, you know, planted one church a year. And we would have said it as though it was this like glorious thing, and to do otherwise would be selfish or fearful, or, you know, like hoarding of resources. Like we demonized it. We called it sin. We did. Like we called it sin. We would, like 10 years ago in the church planting world, we would have said what you guys are doing at Ogden, Utah is sin.
Yeah. Hoarding resources.
And so then what happened? We got our butts kicked is what happened. And we're now,
I mean, not much of those pastors or movements are even around.
They're not. Yep.
And not successful if they are.
All right, hold up. You're not going to want to miss this. I'm going to tell you exactly how our spring 2024 conference is going to go down. Here's the title of the conference: Blueprints for Christendom 2.0. Subtitle: 7 Doctrines for Ruling the World. We're going to have 7 primary sessions covering each of these doctrines for ruling the world righteously. Number 1, Reformed Confessionalism. That's going to be Pastor Doug Wilson preaching on that topic. Then we've got Covenant Theology with Pastor Brian Sauvé. Then we've got Biblical Patriarchy with Pastor Michael Foster. Then we've got Presuppositionalism with Dr. Joseph Boot. Then we've got Kuyperianism, All of Christ for All of Life, where we're going to welcome Pastor Doug Wilson back for a second session. Then we've got General Equity Theonomy. We're going to have Dr. Joseph Boot come and do a second session on that topic. And then lastly, we'll have Pastor Dale Partridge on postmillennial eschatology. In addition to these 7 sessions, we're also going to have not 1, but 2 live podcasts. On the first day of the conference, that's Friday, March 1st, we're going to have a live Theology Applied podcast. I'll be on the stage hosting the discussion with Douglas Wilson, Michael Foster, and Eric Kahn from It's Good to Be a Man. The topic is going to be all about biblical patriarchy. We're going to specifically be parsing out, distinguishing the biblical doctrinal differences between patriarchy and complementarianism. Again, that's Friday, March 1st, the first day of the conference, a live Theology Applied podcast on biblical patriarchy. Then we're going to have the next day, that's Saturday, March 2nd, a live Haunted Cosmos podcast. I'll be hosting this discussion with Brian Sauvé and Ben Garrett. We're going to be talking about the Nephilim. We're going to be talking about the Watchers. We're going to be talking about what creatures currently are living underneath the surface of the earth and chasms of the deep. It's going to be wacky, it's going to be weird, but it will also be thoroughly biblical and incredibly unhinged. So you're not going to want to miss these 2 live podcasts: Theology Applied on Friday, March 1st, the first day of the conference, on biblical patriarchy with Doug Wilson, Michael Foster, Eric Kahn, and myself. And then the next day of the conference, Saturday, March 2nd, a live Haunted Cosmos podcast with Brian Sauvé and Ben Garrett and myself on the Nephilim, the Watchers, and what lies under the surface of the earth. And then the conference will hold over for one final, the third and final day. That's going to be the Lord's Day, Sunday, March 3rd, where one of our speakers will be holding over to preach the Lord's Day sermon, and I'll be leading us in worship through the liturgy. So we've got 3 days, a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 2024, Blueprints for Christendom 2.0, 7 Doctrines for Ruling the World. You're not going to want to miss this conference. Our early bird rate is still available, but only for a very short period of time. We are ending the early bird rate on August 31st at 11:59 p.m. That will be the final chance to get into this conference at an affordable, cheap rate. All right, so go and take advantage of the early bird rate right now by going to rightresponseconference.com. Again, that's rightresponseconference.com to register for Blueprints for Christendom 2.0, March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 2024. Register today.